to the Soviet Union and on to Kyrgyzia, or the Republic of Kyrgyzstan. The only reason we were together as roommates was because we were the only two that were still smokers. And so the rest of them shunning us said, how about you two guys bunking together? Well, as far as we're concerned, it's one of the best things that has happened. Also on that trip was, I can't remember Doug's last name. Doug Glasgow,
yeah.
Who was a member of Dilworth. This was before I was a member. In fact, it was because of Doug I became a member. So this goes way, way back, and it brings us right up here. But this is about Chris, not about me. So let me tell you a few things about him that I'm allowed to say in public. If you pay enough, I will tell you other things about him. Chris Clackum began his broadcast news career nearly 50 years ago, the last 40 of which have been here in Charlotte. He joined WBTV News in January of 1981 as a general assignment reporter. That means that's all he was good for at that point until he proved himself. But he obviously did that very quickly because he soon assumed the duties of investigative reporter, and he would chase stories like the PTL scandal involving Jim and Tammy Baker. He's got great, great stories to tell about that. In 1994, he joined the local NBC affiliate, WCNC, as an anchor/reporter. That led him in 1997 to join NBC as a producer, correspondent at its affiliate news service division located right here in Charlotte, the NBC News Channel. There he would stay for 23 years until his official full retirement just last month. Now, Chris, I have to raise the question that you wanted to title this program this morning. Funny thing happened to me on the way to the office. But since you don't go to the office anymore, you're going to have to share with us what else is happening to you. During his career, he interviewed around 15,000 people while preparing news stories. A list that includes President Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, both George Bushes, Bill Clinton, and Soviet President Gorbachev, the Dalai Lama, the Reverend Billy Graham, and a whole host of people who just wanted to live a better life. His stories have always been interesting and fascinating. So I hope you will join me in welcoming Chris. He's been with us before. He's always a pleasure to hear. Welcome, Chris Clackum. And don't tell any bad stories.
But I do have to tell the one story. When John and I were paired together for a trip from Charlotte to the Soviet Union, that was as John said, 32 years ago. And we were going to the Soviet Union as part of a small delegation of people. There were only 11 of us that had been chosen from Charlotte with the group called Friendship Force to go to the Soviet Union and travel all around, not just Moscow, but at that time it was still being called Leningrad, and we went indeed to Kyrgyzstan. But on the trip over, because John and I were the only two smokers, we were paired up together. And that was quite advantageous when we were put at the top of the 747 on our transatlantic flight that went directly from New York, I think, to somewhere in Switzerland, I think Zurich, and then Zurich on into Moscow. We end up getting into Moscow in the middle of the night and escorted, of course, to a hotel in Moscow. And by that time, we're both pretty doggone ornery and tired and just worn out from the travels, and cannot believe the Spartan conditions that existed inside of that hotel. And I just let go with a choice stream of profanity. I mean, I was just really frustrated and using every word that I had learned over the course of at that time would have been, about a 30-year career in broadcast news. And as you can well imagine, I did come up with some pretty good choice of words there that I was just letting loose with inside of the hotel room. And John's sitting there on his hotel room bed and looks at me. And after I have gone through this tirade, profanity-filled tirade, John says to me, "Chris, what do you know about my background?" To which I replied, "Well, come to think of it, John, not too much. We just met prior to this trip." And John then proceeds to tell me that for the 17 years prior to him becoming the owner-operator of the Little Professor bookstore and Park Road Shopping Center, he had been a Lutheran minister. I could not find a hole big enough to crawl in at that moment. I was so embarrassed and so ashamed of myself for speaking the way that I had in front of a minister. But John took it in stride. We naturally lit a cigarette and shared a good bottle of Russian vodka. And the rest, as they say, was history. That, again, was 32 years ago, back at a time when Gorbachev was in power, still in power, and quite frankly, overseeing the dismantling of the Soviet Union. There was perestroika and glasnost that was going on in the Soviet Union at that time. It was a very interesting time, and he would be proven right 3 years later when the dissolution of the Soviet Union finally did occur in the beginning of the end in 1991. But speaking of smoking and speaking of airplanes, one of the funniest things, and I'm really grateful that it did occur to me early in my career so that I could carry the lesson with me for the rest of my life. I had been sent, of all things, to Europe by WBTV to go cover a story. And it was just it was a run and gun type deal. My photographer and I, and we were just going. We had extremely long days, and we were gone for we were gone for over a week, and every single day was very, very busy. But the point of telling you that is that I did not have a chance to pick up. Again, this is around the mid-1980s, and international travel even back then was nowhere near what it would become later on, 35 years later. But I had not had time to go by a gift shop, for example, to pick up some souvenirs for my two sons and my wife. And on my way back, I was in a gift shop in Gatwick, at the airport in Gatwick, the Gatwick airport near London, south of London, England. And I was on one row, and these were tall, shelves, a store, your typical souvenir shop, separated by tall shelves. And I was looking for some souvenirs, but was suddenly overcome by, I wouldn't say aroma, odor. And it was just this overwhelming body odor. And it was so overwhelming, I decided to exit the gift shop quickly and look down the aisle opposite of where I was standing and saw from whence this odor was emanating. Now, it was a gentleman who was dressed in his native garb, and obviously from a country where personal hygiene is of not that much importance. I quickly exited the gift shop, went ahead and went to the gate. They started the boarding process. Of all things, it was a Delta L-1011. Remember that? Remember those from the days before the 757s and the whatever? But this was a Delta L-1011. It was packed to the hilt, mostly with a bunch of young people who mama and daddy had sent over to London for Wimbledon, because Wimbledon, the tennis tournament, had been going on. And I ended up being seated because I was a smoker and the smoking was allowed on this flight all the way back to Atlanta, I was seated in the smoking section, but on either side of me, just seated beside me, the two seats but right beside me, were two of these young ladies who, when the flight attendant came by and asked the question, who on this flight requested smoking? Well, only about 4 or 5 of us had raised our hand. And as soon as I raised my hand, these two young, lovely ladies, Buffy and Mindy, we'll call them, began talking about me and complaining about the fact that for the next 8.5 hours, they were going to have to sit next to a guy who was likely going to light it up. And they were none too happy with that prospect and just talked about me as I sat there, clearly within earshot. Well, it became such an issue that as soon as the flight attendant came back by a few moments later, I said, ma'am, listen, I am definitely going to need a cigarette sometime over the next 8 hours. Is there anything that we can do, because I don't want my cigarette smoke to bother these two young, lovely ladies sitting next to me? At which point the flight attendant said, hold on, I'll get right back to you. She went right down the aisle, back behind me, came back 2 minutes later. And she said, Mr. Clackum, I have found a solution. I have found someone who will switch seats with you. I stood up. You know where this is going. Yeah. I stood up. I gathered my stuff. I turned around and looked back, and it was the odorous friend from the get. I was going to switch seats with. At which point I just turned to the two young, lovely ladies and said, ladies, have a nice day. I walked back to the back of the aircraft where he had been sitting. And with that, I walked back and I was literally going to exchange. I was going to sit in the seat where he's been sitting. He had been sitting. He was going to sit in my seat. And as I approached the very back row, there was a British businessman who was one of the few other smokers on this flight. When he suddenly set eyes on me, and after the gentleman who had been sitting next to him had departed the area, he set eyes on me, the British businessman did, looked at me, and just in the loudest voice ever, oh, thank God, you're an American. I presumed you have bathed today. And we then went on our merry way, finished up the trip, the 8-hour flight, smoking at will and not bothering everyone. Every now and then standing up to take a look and seeing how the young ladies were handling the situation. It was, speaking of, things in the past, it was, what was going on 43 years ago this week. Any guesses? Anybody? Anybody else? Huh?
Civil rights?
43 years ago this week, Elvis died.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And let's see, that would have been August the 16th of 1977. Carter was in his first year as president. But interestingly enough, and I only bring it up for this reason, is it just one of the stranger things that has occurred during my time in journalism, is that the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite at that time. Now, granted, guys, cable had not taken a foothold in this country yet. There were three major networks: Huntley Brinkley, the CBS Evening News, Walter Cronkite. No, excuse me. At that time, it was John Chancellor. By that time, it was John Chancellor on NBC, Walter Cronkite on CBS, and I can't remember, Frank Reynolds maybe over on ABC. But ABC and NBC both chose to lead with, obviously, the story of Elvis Presley's death. How many of you would agree with that decision? Practically everybody. CBS, under Walter Cronkite's direction, refused to lead with that story. Led instead with some sort of a major development over the Panama Canal treaties. And CBS News, along with Walter Cronkite, never really kind of lived that down. In journalistic circles, it was not that it was that big of a deal, but one of the big people at that time who was arguing, I forget which side he was on, for the Panama Canal treaties, but Ronald Reagan at that point had ridden that subject to go on and defeat Carter in 1980, in the election in 1980. But it was during that time when he was heavily involved in the Panama Canal treaties that I got to interview Ronald Reagan when he came to Columbia, South Carolina, and had actually debated William F. Buckley. Buckley was taking one stance and Ronald Reagan was taking the other stance. But those were, truly some glory days. And it was really at a time when there were so few choices with television. It's hard for anybody under 50 today to imagine that there really was much of a time here today, a very prominent time in this country's history when there were only three choices on what you wanted to watch. And as far as television news was concerned, and even fewer choices when it came to newspapers, major newspapers. But WBTV at that time was led by a fellow by the name of Wally Jorgensen. And Mr. Jorgensen was a man of impeccable integrity and great honor. And he was the general manager, and he was the president of Jefferson Pilot Broadcasting. And any time that anyone who lived in the Charlotte area may recall him from his times, he used to do the editorials on WBTV. He did those editorials through about the early 80s. Right? I tell you about him because he was such a man of again, impeccable integrity and great honor, and just a tremendous person to lead a big broadcasting company like that. But he was never above. WBTV at that time had a cafeteria down in the basement of 1 Julian Price Place that housed the TD station, the radio station, or the two radio stations, I should say, WBT Radio and WBCY FM at that time. But Mr. Jorgensen would often come down to the Pine Terrace restaurant on the ground floor of that. And he and join us all, sit at a table, and went on, sit around, chew the fat over lunch. He came in one day wearing a particularly good-looking tie that I feel pretty certain he had purchased at Jack Wood Limited when it was located on South Tryon Street. Pretty sure that Jack Wood was located on South Tryon Street, one of the finest men's stores ever. He had a particularly good-looking tie on, and when Mr. Jorgensen sat down, he always wore his coat, his jacket, his suit jacket, even when he went to lunch, and he had this great-looking tie on, and I just looked at it, I said, Mr. Jorgensen, that is an absolutely gorgeous tie. Well, thanks, Chris. Appreciate that very much. We go on to discuss the affairs of the day and enjoy another great lunch together. The very next morning, Mr. Jorgensen always entered WBTV through the front door of the building. And on this particular day, which was the next day after I had complimented him about that time, he decided to enter the building through the door that led straight into the newsroom at WBTV. And it was about 8:30 in the morning, and he comes through, and there's easily 24 of us already on the job that day. And as soon as we see him, everybody in the newsroom standing around chewing the fat again, as soon as we see him, we all kind of tighten up, and he says in a rather loud, booming voice that he had, "Where's Clackum?" And everybody pointed right over there, and he came walking right over straight towards me and handed me a box. Didn't say a word. I opened the box. It was the tie. He gave me that tie. It was a Robert Talbot, a very, very nice tie. But as he headed, didn't say a word. As he exited the newsroom, though, and by the time I had opened it, noticed it was the tie, I screamed out, "Hey, Mr. Jorgensen, nice car." It didn't work. And I did, as John mentioned in the introduction, and that I did follow very closely for a number of years, 3 years. Well, it was longer than that, but the scandal itself really consumed 3 years of my professional life at WBTV, chasing Jim and Tammy Baker and that whole PTL scandal. For those of you who lived here during that time, that was from about 1987, and it really played itself out for the next 3 to 4 years. With him ending up going to prison, Tammy Faye divorcing him, she remarrying. Of course, Tammy Faye passed away some 7, 8, maybe even 10 years ago. He is still alive, living in Branson, Missouri, and now selling some miracle cure for coronavirus. But that is until the federal government put the clamps on him and said he can't do that anymore. But I'm just going to leave you with this final story about how in our business, and it's not unlike, I'm not trying to say that the business of journalism and television news is any more unique or different in many other professions, where the spouses of the people who work in the business really are the ones who suffer. There are some benefits that do come along the way, but one in particular, in my instance, happened to be our son is a movie producer right now. He's been working a lot with HBO, but 12 years ago, 13 years ago, his wife was, they became pregnant with our twin grandsons, who now live down here in the Charleston area. But at the time, pretty much before all that was happening, April 2007, there was a movie being shot in Charlotte starring Renee Zellweger, John Krasinski, and George Clooney. And the movie, much of it was shot over at the old Memorial Stadium next to CPCC, and it was called Leatherheads. Well, my son was not a producer of the movie. He was working with the locations team to help the filmmakers decide and procure the sites that certain scenes could be shot. And he got Memorial Stadium, lined up, and George Clooney came to town for a bunch. And Scott, our son, offered to take us to the movie set one day and to see how the filming of different scenes was was going to happen, and obviously a chance to meet George Clooney. Well, as it turns out, there was a big breaking news story that NBC News, now this was again April 2007, and NBC News had sent me out, and I was out of town and I could not go, but my wife ended up going. Gloria ended up going. She got to go to the set, and she got within, I don't know, 15 feet of George Clooney. But my son, one of his jobs is to protect the actors and basically be a bodyguard. And he would not even allow his mother to interrupt Clooney, even if he were by himself or whatever. My son tried to explain, he looks a little bit busy right now, Mom. I can't introduce you. I cannot interrupt him. If when he is done and I can get his attention and maybe he can come over, but I just can't. Well, what Gloria's plans were, she could still be serving time to this day had she gotten close enough to George Clooney. But as it ended up, I mean, Scott had to stand his ground. He had to do what was right. Gloria did get a good look at him, and claims that he is indeed as good looking as anybody can imagine. So fast forward a year later. It's April 2008. Scott's wife, my son's wife, our daughter-in-law, Kelly, is on bed rest, pregnant, the last month of pregnancy with our grandsons. There is a private screening at that movie theater down in the Ballantyne area for this new movie. And it's going to be introduced on stage, live, with George Clooney and Renee Zellweger. Well, that morning I'm getting ready to go to work. At that time, I'm with the NBC News Channel by that time. Scott calls early morning, 7:30-ish, and says, "Hey, Dad, Kelly can't go. Do you want to go to the private screening tonight? George Clooney and Renee Zellweger are going to be there, and it's at that movie theater over there near Ballantyne." I said, "Heck yeah, absolutely." Well, Gloria was a nurse at the time with Mecklenburg Medical Group and working with Dr. Daniel Aquino, and she too was getting ready for work. I hung up the phone and she said, who is that? I said, "It was Scott. I get to go to the private screening tonight where Renee Zellweger and George Clooney are going to be there on stage for the movie." Gloria didn't say a word, picked up the phone, dialed Scott's number. As soon as Scott answered, Gloria said, "You're out of the will." "But Mom, I can't do anything. I can only get 2 tickets and I've got to go." "I don't care. I don't care. You're out of the will. I'll take care of the boys who are to be born a month later, but you're out of the will." She hung up. He had no answer. Now, as it turns out, about an hour and a half, 2 hours later, he did manage to get in touch with somebody at the Film Commission and didn't manage to finagle one more ticket. We got to go to the private screening, but again, we had to keep our distance from George Clooney, lest Gloria do something that she may still be serving time for today. Anyway, that's all I have, guys. Hope you enjoyed that.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. That was wonderful. If we have any questions, if you could raise your hands or put them in the chat. I know Quanta has a question. Quanta, if you would unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. My question is going to be a little bit more serious, I guess. It appears that the information business complex, like the military industrial complex, I just coined that term, is influencing the minds of people with things that are really non-essential for them to learn about what is really impacting them. And right now in this political season, what do you think the media should really be doing rather than making a choice between a popular man's funeral versus what is happening in the Panama Canal? So taking that as an example, could you please enlighten us as to what is the state of affair in the business, information business complex these days?
It is much more challenging, but I will say this, the mission is absolutely no different today than it was the day that Elvis died. Is absolutely no different. But the mission is absolutely the same. And that is just, I mean, it is simplistic and possibly as pedestrian as it may sound. It truly is just about finding out what the truth is as best as we can determine, and then tell you everything that we know about what the truth is. And if we continue to do that without filtering, without bias, with objectivity, with energy, and with attention to the detail, and make sure that it is more important that we get it right these days, because there are seemingly a lot more people who believe or who want to believe that we get it wrong. And so in that regard, I think it's very healthy. I'm not worried about it. I think that it's as resilient as it can be. It has persevered, and it's survived a lot of tests over the years, and this is just the latest.
Any other questions? Chris, who would you say is the most interesting person you've interviewed? And, you know, can you share a little bit about that interview?
Yeah, the Dalai Lama for sure. I mean, and the reason why I say that are the circumstances under which I got to meet the Dalai Lama. Staunch anti-communist. Everybody knows that, right?
Yeah.
Staunch anti-communist. Well, I got to meet him in the mid-90s. And at that time, if you were looking for a staunch anti-communist, you had to look no further than the U.S. Senator from the state of North Carolina, Jesse Helms, who of all things was he and the Dalai Lama were extremely good friends, because both believed, had this virulent, just a very, very strong anti-communist beliefs at that particular time. Jesse Helms had actually invited the Dalai Lama to come speak at Wingate University, down in Wingate, North Carolina, past Monroe on Highway 74, to speak at one of the Jesse Helms lecture series. And the Dalai Lama came there. And then I found out how he had arrived by private plane and where that private plane was parked. So at the Monroe Airport, it was not that huge. You know, there were not that many options. And I found where his plane was parked and went out there. And it was interesting only from the standpoint, though, of just being able to talk to him. He was extremely difficult to understand. Even when he was giving his lecture, he was speaking in English, but he had an interpreter there to interpret his English. And the other one, I did get to interview Gorbachev. And of all things, it was when Gorbachev, again, this was the mid-90s, and Gorbachev had already left office in the Soviet Union. The breakup was darn near complete. Of all things, Gorbachev was making a worldwide tour. And he was not he was not bashful. He was very proud of what he had done and in contributing to the breakup of the Soviet Union. He came and spoke to Charlotte Latin. He spoke at Charlotte Latin one day, and in fact, Robert Pittenger, who would later become the congressman from the Charlotte area, congressman from the Charlotte area, was the one who managed to arrange the invitation. I say Charlotte Latin, it could have been Charlotte Country Day, but I can't remember now right off the top of my head. But he came here, and I had a few moments with him, and I asked him a very personal question because I had heard something. Mikhail Gorbachev was raised Christian, and he had to keep his Christianity, and his parents were devout Christians, but they were also, I'm pretty sure they were devout communists as well. And when that he had two photographs in his home growing up. One was of Lenin, and the other one was of Jesus Christ in his home. And he told me about that. So he confirmed it.
Great story. Any other questions? If you'd raise your hand or unmute yourself. Excellent. Well, if there are no other questions, I don't see any other hands raised. Let me see, look at the chat here real quick. Okay, Quanta has another question. Quanta, if you'd unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. It was a follow-up when you said the truth, and I was wondering when making choices what to report and then tell the truth about what you are reporting. Mm-hmm. I understand that, but my question was about the choices. What do we report? Somebody, some prominent person's funeral versus something that is going to really impact the people themselves, their lives. As it is right now, I think we go more on the sensational side and then having a stranglehold on the minds of people. And the media has a responsibility to really focus on the things that impact everyone in a unified manner, like healthcare, their basic needs, and like essential wages for essential workers so that they can meet their essential needs rather than falling into this dichotomies, either this or that. That's what I wanted to.
Yeah, and that is really a very, very good question, because there is obviously we run the risk sometimes in what we choose to cover and how we choose to cover it. There is the risk that we run that a bias can creep in, that we can lose objectivity over something. But I want most people to know that it is not one person that's making a decision. It is a group of people who bring to the table diverse opinions, and to include how we should approach something. But also, let me say that there is a time-honored formula for determining. You may not necessarily be interested in a particular story, but one thing that I can almost guarantee you is that it's important. If it were not important, I don't think that we would bother take up your time trying to tell you the story. What we try to measure things by is how many people are affected by a particular news story. If there is a water main break in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, I don't think too many people are going to be very concerned about it in Charlotte, North Carolina. If there is, however, a dam break in Charlotte, North Carolina, that threatens a lot of people, that could be a lot of interest to people around the world who may have family or friends or just curious as to why that dam is breaking, so that the dam in their neighborhood doesn't do the same thing sometime down the road. So we do try to measure stuff, and there is that, again, time-honored formula for figuring out that which affects the greatest number of people are those things that we try to concentrate on. And naturally, by definition, that which affects the greatest number of people is what our government does. Our government does a lot that has an effect on every single one of us. And that's the reason why we end up doing some of the things that we do. I do not necessarily disagree with you about so much of the celebrity and or entertainment news or something like that. But depending upon what has happened to that person in entertainment or celebrity news, could have an effect on people. That's my best answer on that. It is the honest answer. Most people, you go through and you present a dozen stories to a dozen newsrooms, and they will probably come up with the different order for the final six. But for the first six, a good, bona fide, reputable newsroom is going to come up with the same six stories to lead their newscast. It's going to be close anyway, because everybody is trying to abide by, kind of unwritten rule about what constitutes a news story.
Excellent. Thank you. In the interest of time, we'll wrap up, but we'll leave the Zoom call open for a few minutes. And if you have any other questions or want to catch up, please do so after we finish the official business. So at this point, again, Chris, thank you so much. John, thank you so much for bringing us, Chris. We really appreciate it. It's been an excellent talk as usual. We really appreciate it. And now, again, reminder, next week we have our in-person social, and we had a couple of other guests join us after the call started. Emma, happy to have you here with us. Luther, good to see you. And Jean, good to see you as well. Thank you for joining our call.
Thank you.
And with that, let's go ahead and do the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. First, is it the truth?
Truth.
Second,
Is
it
it
fair to all
fair?
concerned?
All concerned.
Third,
Will it build goodwill,
Goodwill and better
better
friendship.
friendships?
fourth,
Official to all concerned.
absolutely. And finally, fifth,
Will it be fun?
will it be fun?
Will it be
Absolutely. Chris will be making a donation to the Rotary Foundation in your honor. Thank you for being with us today. Yes.
Wow.
Not at all.
Wow.
And thank you so much for being here. And we look forward to seeing you all again next Friday. Have a great weekend, and thank you again. And with that, the meeting is adjourned, but we'll leave the Zoom call open for you if you want to stay and chat and get caught up. Please unmute yourself.
Is Rhett Turner still on the line?
No, I don't see him.
No.
Oh, phooey. Wanted to say hi to him again. Hey, David.
How are you, Chris?
Doing fine. Good to see you again.
You as well.
Yeah.
You're aware that Larry Harding was a member of our club, aren't you?
Yeah.
Larry was a member for a long time, quite a lot of years ago. Did you know Larry? You must have. He worked at BT for years.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. He was an engineer.
Yes, he was across the street from the main. His office, I think, was across the street at one time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Larry was a vice president of, I don't remember what area, but Larry was a good member of our club.
Yeah.
Hey, Emma, good to see you. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing fine. It's good to see you too.
We've
Good.
missed you.
Yeah.
I know, I've missed y'all too. I'm so sorry. I've ghosted.
Oh, no, it's just good. We're happy to have you back. Good to see
Yeah, sure you've been busy.
I want to let everyone know we will be doing a blood drive for the American Red Cross here this Friday, the 28th, from 2 o'clock to 6:30. So if anybody wants to sign up or get more information from me, please reach out to me. I'll put my email address in the chat so everyone will have it.
you. Hey, Jenny, maybe you can share that with the club?
So Emma, could you send it to me and I'll send it out to everybody?
I certainly will.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Of
Emma.
course. No, thank y'all.
Thank you so much for answering my questions. But this is kind of like off the after hour question. Do you think that, when you said Gorbachev was a Christian, but at the same time, he was also a communist. So is it possible for a Christian to believe in the socialist economy and governing system, at the same time believe in Jesus Christ, or vice versa? So are they mutually exclusive, or can they be mutually inclusive?
Well, I tell you, I really don't want to go there. I just don't, I don't feel comfortable, talking about somebody and their justification for whatever their religious beliefs are.
Yeah,
Kind of an
I
individual
understand.
thing.
I am a believer, and I'm not a communist, but I do kind of think that sometimes we dissect things and fragment things, and sometimes it's better to look at it from a holistic perspective rather than with our fragmented perception of realities. That's all.
Hey, Chris, I got a quick question for you, buddy.
Yes, sir.
What's with all the breaking news?
Yeah.
Is there ever going to be an end to that? It seems like every 5 seconds there's breaking news, and it's already broken 24, 48 hours ago. That is so annoying.
I really do like, I think it was Stephen Colbert who started it on the Daily. He had Stephen Colbert show on Comedy Central. When news breaks, we fix it. Kevin,
I love it.
Kevin, I'm right there with you. It's just not necessary. And when you keep blowing everything out of proportion,
Right.
at what point are people just going to, well, they already are. They've stopped listening to that. And it can't be any more important. I do believe that it has been completely overused. There are things like that, and I don't want to seem like an old fuddy-duddy, but these guys they've just got to be very careful these days. If ever there is a time in this country where the media has got to get it right, it is right now.
This is it.
This is it. Because those times when they don't get it right, when they don't get it right, it's going to be seized upon. And the critics are going to jump on that and say that is the reason why you can't trust the media.
Mm-hmm. So true.
Mr. Clackum, I thought I would share with you, during the pandemic, Ranjit and I and my broader family started watching CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell because I really like her.
Yeah.
I like her. She's aggressive and just the most, polished way. But I have to say, it's just got to be so annoying how she opened with breaking news, to Kevin's point. It's not breaking, it's just news. And I also started to feel, I hadn't been watching the evening news for a long time. And by the way, I come from a journalism family. My father was the editorial page editor of the Dayton Daily News for his entire career. He retired a few years ago. So we're a newspaper family. And my dad always criticized the alarmist nature of like the local news when they would have, he would walk through the room and say, oh, all these news people always looking for a fire. But of course, supportive of the good stories and to this day. But I started to feel like that formula was so manipulative of the viewer. You know, they frighten us at the beginning. They tell us, you know, breaking news. And then the commercial breaks, of course, get longer. And then they throw us a feel-good story in the end that I always felt was not that great quality. And by the end, I would feel emotionally exhausted.
Yeah. And again,
I stopped watching.
They're squandering. I mean, and when they do that, they're just squandering the opportunity. And they're just, we just have to do a better job. And I completely agree with Kevin that you just can't go down that road. You can't keep going down that road. Oh, listen to me, listen to me, listen to me. This is breaking. Well, what's not breaking news under?
Right, right.
You know, Chris, one other thing, and Romy, that I completely agree with you. I think that there's that buildup, and then there's this. But one other thing it seems to me is, and it's so frustrating, it seems as if it's gotten so formulaic that there's a set amount of time for every person that they interview live, and it doesn't seem like people are given enough time to really give an answer, because they're constantly cutting people off and saying, well, we've got to stop now. And that seems kind of unfair.
Yeah. let me tell you what scares me. Yeah, and Rami, I think that you're going to be able to relate to this. Here's what scares me. And this is a genuine concern.
Okay.
Newspaper business in this country, where's it going?
Gone.
Okay, right? What are we going to be left with? Television? Excuse me? I mean, what did Walter Cronkite preach for years and years and years? Don't you dare just rely upon what I say on the CBS Evening News every night. You go read several newspapers of choice and news magazines, and you do what you can. With the advent of the internet, yes, there's a lot of downside to it, but there's also a lot of upside. There are places that you can go for reliable information on the internet. There's no excuse for people not knowing something today. Quite frankly.
Yes.
The average person just, you know, but what really scares me is long-form journalism. The absence of long-form journalism petrifies me. And that's where we're headed, because only the legacy newspapers are being able to survive in this environment, and they're struggling. How many ads, how many emails do you get a day from the New York Times, Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, Los Angeles Times, or, you know, whatever these great big legacy newspapers, the national newspapers, are struggling to survive in this economy, in the new economy. And that right there petrifies me. I see that as a great threat to our democracy, to our way of life, because if we don't have a long-form journalism, a checks and balances system for the people who are doing what, you know, the government, a checks and balance system on the government especially, but everybody else. I mean, it's really a dangerous, and that scares me more than anything right now.
It feels to me like we're at such a crunch societally in so many ways. There's so much change happening technologically, and with the pandemic changing the way we do things, that's also creating pressure on the news kind of world to adapt. So I'm a psychologist, and one of the topics that I had to work with my clients through in the pandemic is how they consume news. I've never talked with my clients particularly about that in all my years of practice, which is 17, almost 20. And now one of the topics that we hit every time is I'll ask them, how are you consuming news? Not to try to get them just to reliable sources. Of course, that's important, but to manage their overwhelm and keep them informed. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had. So I feel like people are trying to find their way to identify a reliable news source that doesn't overwhelm them. I heard this very interesting piece about how I think it's the BBC has hired some tech consultants to change the way their website operates so that you can sort of manage, like some people get really overwhelmed if certain pieces of news come at them, like if they're trauma survivors or whatever it is, that they can sort of navigate it in a way that allows them to be informed but not totally overwhelmed. I don't know that they've 100% figured it out. Of course, the risk is that you block out some news that you need, but it's better than just turning the whole thing off. I think it's a very interesting time.
You know, and certainly somebody who's been in a newsroom, in several newsrooms as long as I have, I've been somewhat conditioned, but I do feel it's easy. My point with that is that I figured out ways to turn it off in my own mind, you know, and in my own life. I figured out ways. I do feel sorry for people who cannot get away from it, who just can't get it out of their mind, because a lot of this is a very scary stuff that is going on right now.
And it's something that's happening every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Chris, thank you again. I've got to leave, unfortunately, but thank you, buddy. Good seeing
thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
And
thank
I have to too, and we're the moderators, so it was wonderful hearing you.
Thank you all. You all take care.
You too. Good to see you, Emma.
Good to see you.
Bye, guys.
Chris, are you going to be doing a video, you know, like journaling online or blog or anything like that?
Nah, I about it, but you know, I'm really enjoying this retirement thing.
Well, if you do, let us know, okay?
Yeah, will do. Hey, take care, Jane. Thanks so much.
You too.
Thank
Bye,
you, Chris.
everybody.
Bye, guys.